Wish is tanking, Marvel's tanked, Ant-Man, Indiana Jones, Haunted Mansion.
Not great, Bob.
And on that, a common thing that you hear these days is that audiences are choosing lately not to go to see Disney films because they have gotten too woke. Or to put another way, Disney has been spending too much time and energy trying to send a message instead of simply writing a good story and entertaining its audience. But this is not a new development. This is something that people have been saying, a phenomenon that has been happening for a few years now. And it seemed as though Disney was just going to keep powering through and keep making the same kinds of movies in spite of everything. But with the recent nosedive at the box office for a variety of Disney films, they may finally be deciding to change their philosophy just a little bit. Disney CEO Bob Iger was a guest at the Deal Book Summit hosted by the New York Times. He spoke for about 30 minutes on a variety of topics, all of which actually were quite interesting. There was a lot of great sound bites coming out of that interview, and I would love to be able to spend time talking about each of these things said in that interview. But today, we're going to focus on this.
I think what had happened over a period of time is that creators lost sight of what their number one objective needed to be. Entertain, and if you can infuse it with positive messages and have a good impact on the world, fantastic. But that should not be the objective.
Without saying it directly, he's responding to the criticism from audiences that Disney has become too woke. Now, let me just say real quick, before we move on, I'm not necessarily saying this, and I get that in comments sometimes. David, Disney's not too woke. You shouldn't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm reporting on the perception that some of Disney's audience has. This is the criticism that I'm hearing. And on that topic, Iger is saying that somewhere along the way, Disney began to focus too much on sending a message in their films, be that political or cultural, instead of simply entertaining. And if a message happens to be a product of that entertaining story, all the better. But the message should not be the reason to make the film. The point isn't the message, the point is to entertain. Now, I've been watching social media and some comments that people have been making regarding that statement from Iger regarding Disney is that Disney's no longer interested in providing a message, which is also not the case. He's saying that it simply needs to be a byproduct of a good story and of entertaining the guests. If they write a good story and entertain its viewers, and a message happens to happen, it happens to be included in that as a byproduct or something that is subtly perceived through the film, then that's all the better. And that will always be of interest to Disney, no matter what, because that's always been the business that they are in, telling positive, life-affirming stories from the very beginning. And so some kind of message is inherent in that. But again, to reiterate, the point isn't the message. The point should be to tell a good story and to entertain. The art should be the point, not the message. So on this, I'm actually very encouraged by what he said. And I think this is a very good move by Iger, not just to say it, but to say it in such a public way, in a way that we are all going to immediately consume. It forces a sort of commitment to that change in philosophy. I believe that was intentional on his part, to say it on stage for everyone to hear as a sort of affirmation that they mean it. I hope so, at least. It's a nonverbal promise that Disney is going to start focusing on making better movies, which, by the way, the opposite of that is something that he admitted to previously in that interview.
Second, in our particular case, and specifically about those films, some of those films, they were not as good, they were not as high in quality, not every one that you mentioned, as some of their predecessors, our films, and as they should have been, particularly in this environment.
Why do you think that was?
He's saying that Disney movies have not been all good. Some have been good, but most of them have not. And he's saying it out loud. So that's the positive messaging that I'm getting from Iger in this. But something that I object to is the idea that this all happened while he was out.
I think what had happened over a period of time, it was building and building, and maybe I think it reached a peak of some sort while I was gone.
Bob, that just is not the case. Let's talk about Strange World, if you don't mind. Lots of messages in Strange World. The film released in theaters in November of 2022. Definitely that was on Chapek's watch. Chapek was president at that time. But it's not like they make these movies over a weekend. Given that it typically takes 3 or 4 years to make an animated movie, I would guess this one began production somewhere around 2018 or 2019. I know for a fact that they were talking about writing this story, pitching it in 2017. Iger's watch, to be sure. But never mind that. How about this?
Is that creators lost sight of what their number one objective needed to be.
The picture that he's trying to paint here is that the filmmakers, the writers, and the actors, and the editors, and the directors, they're all just coming up with these stories on their own. They're filming them, they're editing them, they're directing them, they're doing all this on their own with little or no input from the studio. Does this sound like Disney at all? Does this sound like Hollywood at all? Not just Disney. I mean, of course not. It's practically a cliche in Hollywood that there's way too much interference, way too much influence from executives to the point where it's exasperating for the actors and the writers and the directors and the editors. They can't shut up about how much the studio gets in the way of their ability to make a good film. Creators lost sight? I mean, where do creators get their direction from? I give Iger a lot of credit for acknowledging where Disney has gone wrong in recent years on this and other topics mentioned in this interview. But let's be real, this is not the creator's fault. What's happening in Hollywood right now, it's not the creator's fault. Certainly we can say that, for example, writing is bad. I mean, we've all seen it. We all are aware that writing isn't quite the art that it used to be. And again, this isn't just a Disney problem. This is something that's going on in every studio. But I can also say that actors, writers, editors, directors, all of them, they all want to make the best product that they can. They all want to make a good movie. They want to express themselves, to entertain. That is their goal. They're not really interested. I'm sure they do want to make a successful film. I'm sure that box office success is of interest to them, but it's not their reason for doing what they do. They get a paycheck separate from, the grosses. Well, actually, some actually do get a percentage, but that's for the top tier. For the majority of people in Hollywood, it's a paycheck. And so they do what they're asked to do because that is their job. But given a certain amount of freedom, they're going to want to, they might make a very different film than what we finally see on screen. Put another way, blaming creatives for the lack of success in Hollywood these days is like blaming Imagineers for Pixar Pier or Galaxy's Edge and their perceived shortcomings, as it were. There have been complaints about, those are just two examples of things that people have complained about that didn't go as well as they had hoped at Disney parks. I mean, we've all seen and heard the original plans for those projects and many others. There were great ideas, imaginative ideas that didn't happen. And it was Disney who said, no, we're not going to do that. Creators, as a collective, I don't believe, have lost sight of what their number one job is. Disney has. Hollywood has. And audiences are letting them know by not going to the theaters with the frequency that they used to. Not unless they know that it's going to be worth their time and worth their money to do so. Which, by the way, here's an interesting side note to this conversation. This is one of my favorite things about Hollywood today. The movie doesn't even necessarily have to be good. The point isn't for it to be good necessarily. The point is to entertain. And that is expressed with this. What is one of the most profitable genres in theaters right now? Not just pure box office, not if a movie makes $1 billion or $500 million or whatever, but profit. Which films are making a profit? Horror films are. Meg 2 grossed $400 million on a $125 million budget. Insidious, this is just in the last year. Insidious, Red Door, that grossed $189 million on a $16 million budget. Five Nights at Freddy's grossed $285 million on a $20 million budget. The Nun 2, seriously, The Nun 2, the 18th highest grossing film of the year, $268 million on a $38 million budget. Every one of those movies is going to outgross Wish. Every one of those movies is going to outgross the Marvels, probably. And there are lots more, but you get the idea. The point isn't to be good necessarily, it's to be entertained. None of those movies that I just described could be described as being good. Now, I'm not trying to say that Disney needs to get into horror films, not at all, because that's obviously not, their wheelhouse. I'm just saying Disney needs to get into the entertainment business. Do the things that they're good at, but do it in a way that we are entertained instead of being told how to feel or think. Today, it's as expensive as heck to go to a movie theater. especially considering how easy it is and how inexpensive it is, relatively speaking, to stream. I mean, Disney Plus is like, what, $7-10 a month? By itself, it's not a lot, but I know that I've got 5 or 6 different streaming services. So I pay like $100 a month on streaming myself. But that does give me access to just about every possible film that's being made right now. So if Disney wants us to get into the theaters, they've got to give us a reason. So I applaud Bob Iger for his comments, for saying that stuff out loud. It's a strong move to be forthright in, some of the mistakes you've made. A mistake.
Too much, by the way.
Mistake.
Definite mistake.
Big mistake. That's actually a word that he used in a different conversation. But and again, this interview was on a lot of different topics, and a lot of it was about things that they're not doing right. Very honest on that. Well, mostly honest. Again, he's trying to spin this and put it on Chapek and creatives, not owning his own mistakes in that regard. So on that, let's be honest about where those mistakes are coming from. And then let's act on that now. I would very much like to see some visible action on Disney's part to show that they are interested in creating a better product for its audience. You can't take the guest or the audience for granted forever. Putting the audience first and giving value, more value than expected, will always be a good business decision. A bad business decision would be to give less value than we are expecting, especially considering how much things cost today. Don't wait, act now. And while you're at it, do the same thing in Disney parks. We're all begging you. Act now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed. Follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked, on Twitter at FreshBakedDisney, that's fresh with no E, and on TikTok at FreshBakedDisney. And if you like our show and want to show your support, please do consider joining our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/freshbaked. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, everybody. We love you. Be safe out there. Be kind to one another. Fresh Baked.